Welcome to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Mahin Azam Khan. In our last episode, we explored how floods have caused massive displacement. This week, we turn to South Punjab, where floods have once again left behind devastation and stories that often go unheard. Alipur and Jalalpur Peerwala were among the hardest hit this season. When waters rushed through these towns, homes were washed away, fields drowned, and families forced to flee with whatever they could carry. To understand what life looks like in these flood-hit areas, we spoke to journalist Munizae Jahangir, who is on the ground meeting families struggling to piece together their lives. Assalamu alaikum, Munizae. Thank you so much for joining us today. So when you first reached Alipur and Jalalpur Peerwala, what struck you the most about the condition of the flood-affected communities?
Well, I mean, we were traveling along the Sakkar-Multan motorway. And while we were approaching Jalalpur Peerwala just on the M5, the main motorway, at that time, now we know that the motorway has drowned, but we were standing right there where the motorway had not drowned by then, and there was no actual, the water hadn't like broken it apart. We were standing there, and just that seemed to be the only dry ground where people could reach. All around us, there were the floods, and there was flood water, and hundreds of homes had been drowned by the flood water. People were rescuing themselves. Some were coming out with the help of ropes. Others had put their children in a kadhai, literally in pots and pans. And some had tied up Coke bottles together and had made that into a float. And they were, with the help of that, they were coming to the motorway, which is the only dry part. And people had put their charpais on top of their heads, made it into kind of a shelter, and were sitting there with their children, with the women in their family, and with the goats or whatever they could salvage. Now, what was very sad is that these people perhaps live below the poverty line, and their only source of income or livelihood are the animals and the cattle that they rear. And most of that cattle got lost or was drowned, and the ones that they could save was, let's say, a hen, which is a lightweight animal, so they could salvage and they could rescue the hen. Just 2 days before the flood waters actually came, electricity was cut off, so there was no way that they could call for help for rescue or call 1122, and there was no gas in the area anyway. There's no piped gas in the area, so there was no gas. So by and large, they were helping themselves. There was no government machinery that was active there. There were no boats, rescue boats by the government that were going out and rescuing these people. Most of them were swimming in this dirty water. I saw snakes in the water. I saw people coming out of water, and they complained of diarrhea. They complained of all kind of fungal infection, skin diseases, etc. There was no clean drinking water. Hardly any. There was no food. There was no food for children. There was no milk for children. And worst of all, women came out and said, these clothes are the only clothes I have on my body. There's no other clothes that I have. Similarly, in Alipur, we saw that, especially Seedpur area, homes upon homes were inundated with flood water. We saw two boats. One was by the Navy and the other one was another boat. And then there was also religious outfits that had their boats. And we saw families, walking through the water. And I appealed to the people on the boat saying, why don't you go and rescue the families? And they turned around and said, well, we are waiting for the officer to come at 3 p.m. Until he doesn't come, we can't go out and rescue those families that we could see perhaps just a mile away, wading through flood waters, trying to come to the shore and to dry land. So 3 o'clock became 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock became 5 o'clock. The officer never came, the boats never moved. And those families, with the help of a stick, kind of, waded through all this flood water and came to dry land. That was very sad. And then I understood that perhaps they didn't have people to run those boats. They were boats, but there was nobody to operate those boats. So the disaster is very, very large. The people affected are too many. And there are too few boats that went around. And the help that came was too little, too late.
Floods do not only destroy land and property, they alter the rhythm of everyday life. Families are often left with nothing but makeshift shelters, struggling to secure the bare minimum of food, water, and safety. We asked Munizae to describe what she saw when she arrived in South Punjab. And when disasters strike, vulnerabilities aren't equally shared. Women often bear the brunt, caring for children, walking long distances for clean water, or coping with the absence of private safe spaces. Thank you so much for explaining the situation over there. And the situation actually seems extremely horrifying. I would actually like to focus on how different groups within these communities are experiencing this situation. In your observation, how are women particularly affected by the floods compared to men?
Well, when I went there were very few women reporters who go to these areas. And I was one of the few women reporters who was there. So immediately women surrounded me and they wanted to talk about what they were going through. They were not at all shy. I've seen that in the past in Balochistan where women would not come out, they would not talk, but not in the south of Punjab. Everybody wanted to talk and everybody was saying that hum lut gaye. They said hum lut gaye. And, we have been waiting at our homes. The water is 12 feet high. We've had our children, the children don't have milk, they don't have soft food, especially. And they kept showing me the food that was given to them at the camp. So I visited the camps also. The government had set up these camps in government high schools. And they were given three meals 3 times a day. So I was there towards the evening, and the meal that I saw was like boiled rice, but it was all kind of mixed up together. So it didn't look very appetizing. So they said, this is the food that we get. We don't have any food and or stuff for our children. What was one thing that was really lacking, and I really saw that, felt that I've covered the 2005 earthquake, I've covered the floods 2010, 2014, 2022. Every time that there has been a disaster, people of the country have stepped up. But I haven't seen that this time around. There were no clothes to go around. Women consistently complained that this was the only cloth that they had. The clothes that they were wearing on their body was the only clothes that they had. They had no shoes. They had no clothes. In the camps, in one camp, the camp manager told me that there is capacity for 2,000 people, but there are 3,000 people in that camp. There were 9 toilets for 3,000 people. And in those toilets, running water had finished. So it was stinking. I was standing there. I couldn't stand there because the stench was so much. So, these women are used to having their own homes, or some of them wanted to do parda but could not. There were too few tents. There were too many women, and they complained of their children. So they were largely very concerned about their children. So women and children really go hand in hand, because the mothers take care of the children. So they kept on complaining that there wasn't soft food, there were no clothes for children. The camp manager told me that some of the people had actually gone and taken refuge at their relatives' homes, which was still dry, but they would come still to have meals, the 3 times meals a day. And the women were worried. They said, right now we are staying at our relatives' home, but I don't know how long we can stay at our relatives' home. What will happen? There's no space in the camps, and there was actually no space. So when I was walking out of the camps, all around the camps, I saw people put up whatever they had, whether it was a shirt, whether it was a charpai, whatever. They put it up on their head and they were sitting there. And I said, why don't you go into the camps? And they said, but there's no space. How do we go inside the camps? So, I saw that. Plus, I saw women who were unwilling to leave their homes with their husbands. They would stay there, and they would stay there with their animals. They said, look, we've reared our animals. This is our only source of income. We are not leaving these animals. We're not leaving our homes. We've seen what happens in camps before. We have been victims of floods before. Hum rul jayenge, hum lut jayenge. There's no point in us going to the camps. We might as well stay in our inundated homes. And that's what we were seeing, really. And it's very scary because, you have all these wires, electricity wires that are there, they can be electrocuted at any point. They can, all the people who were coming out of the water were complaining of skin rashes, of diarrhea. Women were complaining of headaches. When I went to the camps, they said we need Panadol. There was not enough Panadol, not enough fungal medicine. So, things are really desperate. And I worry that with the winter coming in, where are all these people going to go? How long will their relatives keep them in their homes? And as far as the government is concerned, what I saw in Jalalpur, Peerwala, there were no rescue boats. There was no way to rescue them. People were just walking on the road, and they really didn't have a plan of action. 45 minutes after I was there, we heard that the whole motorway had been, slashed open with the flood waters. And at that point, if had they made a decision that yes, we will make an incision, or some kind of a shagaf, as they call it, on the motorway, so that the water can be given some way, maybe there could have been controlled damage. But there was absolutely no controlled damage. So I think that though they are firefighting, and I could see that they are firefighting the government, it's too little too late. The disaster is way too big, and there is no macro strategy, you know.
I think it's very evident that women are impacted more by climate change. And like you mentioned, there's absolutely no macro strategy that pertains and that caters women
Yeah.
directly.
And,
You
and
also
one
mentioned that.
Oh, sorry. One thing is that whenever the relief trucks would come, whether they would come from a private NGO, and there were plenty of those, or whether it was through the government, the men would, kind of beat themselves to the truck, and grab whatever they could. It was really the women who couldn't do it. So the men would get the tents, the women would be left behind. In one area in Alipur, close to Alipur, in the city, I saw a whole bunch of men who were standing outside the commissioner's office, and they were promised tents at 3 o'clock. By the time I reached, it was 7 p.m. They were all lathi charged, and they were pushed back. So, I mean, in this kind of environment, it's very difficult for women to hold their children, get lathi charged, and ask for tents. So you're right. I mean, it's the women who really suffer because it's rough for them anyway.
The younger survivors carry scars of their own. In towns like Alipur and Jalalpur, Peerwala, schools have been damaged, routines shattered, and playgrounds turned into camps. For children, the flood isn't just about displacement, it's about growing up in uncertainty. As you rightfully also mentioned, that women and children go hand in hand. So I'd like to understand how children are coping up with this difficult situation. What did you notice about children in these areas? Were they in school, displaced, or showing signs of trauma?
Well, I mean, children are children, they would play wherever they are. So, what I did notice was that in the camp that I was, which was in Alipur, not in Jalalpur, in Jalalpur Peerwala, in fact, in Jalalpur Peerwala, in one of the government high schools, I saw that there were 35 pregnant women who were there, and the government had provided a midwife for them. So the women were very worried about what's going to happen to them, where are they going to have the delivery, etc. And I was happy to see that there was a midwife. But the situation, I mean, it was so filthy. There was no hygiene, nothing for these women. And the food that they were having or they were being given, I know it was 3 times a day, but it was not something that pregnant women could eat or you and I could eat. This was rice that had probably gone bad or was sticky. So the food wasn't up to the mark. It was not nutritious. I mean, even if you give somebody boiled rice, you give them a dal or you give them some vegetables, but there was none of that. Children, I saw children as usual running around, looking displaced, and they showed signs of rashes. So the children had a lot of skin rashes. There was malnutrition apparent. You can tell when children are blonde, it's not because they're doing some fashion, it's because it's malnutrition. So there was a lot of malnutrition there anyway. Obviously this didn't happen overnight with the floods, but I worry that with children who are already under the poverty line and malnutrition, what's going to happen to them during the floods? These people have lost their livelihoods, these people have lost their fields. Most of this is an agrarian economy. They have lost their cattle. How are the children going to be fed? The winter is coming in. What was interesting was that there were all these extremist religious groups that had tents. I'm always amazed as to how much money they always have. And again, they hadn't seemed to have a lot of money, a lot of tents. And they had set up like a child play area, which I thought was very useful because if anybody has small children, they would understand that children need to be occupied and mothers need that time to, help themselves or, make food or whatever there is they have to do. So one of the things that was missing, and through your podcast, I would like to appeal to people, please send toys. This is one thing that's missing. Children need to be occupied. And one of the things in the camp that was missing was that there was no school, there were no classes, and there was nothing to play with.
This actually brings me to my next question, as you mentioned, schools, toys, and how to keep children preoccupied. How has the loss of schools, safe spaces, and routine affected children's mental health and education?
Well, I mean, children obviously understood that there was a disaster. They were asking me whether they will be able to go home, whether they will see their home again or not. They felt displaced. They felt very disoriented. They saw their mothers in agony. They didn't have any clean drinking water. There was really a lack this time around of clean drinking water. There was a lack of food. I saw them chasing, trucks, hoping that there would be some food there. So obviously, this is going to have a very bad effect on children. I hope that there will be a plan to start some kind of classes in these camps, or maybe play groups in these camps to help children. There were no clothes. There was absolutely no clothes, no shoes. And I saw a lot of women with no shoes on their feet. I saw a lot of children with no shoes on their feet. So that's one of the things that was not there.
But beyond families' resilience, these floods raise a sharper question. How ready was the state to respond? I would now like to shift the conversation as to how institutions and authorities have responded to all of this. Based on what you saw, how prepared was the local administration in Alipur and Jalalpur, Peerwala to handle this scale of flooding?
You see, I've been covering floods and natural disasters in Pakistan now for decades, and I've always felt this way, that the babus and the militaries cannot really, tackle a natural disaster of this magnitude. There needed to be local body elections. Had there be local body elections and there was a local government in place, and the politicians would have a stake in what happens to these people, there would have been far better accountability, and there would have been far better performance as a result. Wherever I saw politicians coming in and trying to help people, they were really going out of the way because they knew that they have to get votes from these very people. Whenever I met a babu or I met a military, they said, oh, they were going according to calendar and according to their duties and according to their roster or whatever they were given. So you see, I think that the lack of a local body in Punjab has really exasperated the situation with the floods. Until you do not have active local body representation, till then you won't be able to even do something as simple as data collection. So, you will not know that these people are from your village, or are they not? Are they posing as somebody who are from your villages? They kept, the authorities kept complaining, oh, the people of Alipur have come and they have taken away the tents, etc. Now, if you had a local body representative, you would know who his people are. You see, so it's all a matter of such a large country, and you can't knit it together with just an MPA and a couple of babus and the military. It doesn't work that way. The cookie doesn't crumble this way. You need to have tentacles in the local population. And in order to have those tentacles, you need to have a local body that's working.
Floods expose more than weak infrastructure. They reveal gaps in governance. Relief efforts, when they arrive, they're really designed with women and children in mind. And beyond preparation, I'm also curious to find out about the role of relief organizations and whether their efforts are reaching everyone fairly. From your observation, are relief efforts, governments or NGOs addressing the unique needs, especially of women and children, or do you think they're also being overlooked?
Look, aate mein namak ke barabar, as they say it. It's just too little, and it's just too very little. I mean, you have, hundreds of villages that have drowned. You're talking hundreds and thousands of people that need relief, that need immediate relief, food, water, tents, clothes. No NGO has the capacity to deal with that big a crisis. The government of Punjab, which is the richest government in Pakistan, is struggling to deal with this crisis. And the other problem is that they don't have the expertise to deal with this crisis. Something like this, there should have been a flash appeal to the United Nations immediately, because they are the ones who have the expertise. They are the ones who have dealt with natural disasters in the past. They could have moved in very, very quickly and tried to salvage the situation and create camps. Look, even when it's been the war on terror. I have seen UN put up camps, and the way they do it, the way, this is years and years of experience that has gone in it. So there's obviously a method to it, which the government of Punjab obviously doesn't have because they haven't had that experience. So I think that they should have actually asked for appeal. They should have appealed to the international community. It's not just about money. It's about expertise. It's about capacity. And the government of Punjab right now doesn't have the expertise and doesn't have the capacity and doesn't have the know-how, the experience of how to salvage the situation and how to put people in camps, how to make sure that they are comfortable. They should have asked for the UN to come in much, much faster. I don't know what's taking them so long.
The road to recovery requires more than temporary aid. It demands policy change and long-term planning that center the most vulnerable.
Like you rightfully said, that the sort of floods also that we faced this year were different from the floods that we faced in the previous years. And this year, the charter has been about implementation, governance, because this is something that we will face next year as well. And unless we don't fix our implementation bodies and governance bodies, a change won't come by. If you had the chance to influence a policy directly, I'd love to hear what you think should come first. If you could propose one top policy recommendation for South Punjab's flood-affected women and children, what would it be?
Well, firstly, I think that there are no shortcuts to this. You need to have local body elections immediately. You need to make an appeal to the people, asking for food, for clothes, for drinking water, all of that. And you need to talk to your own people. Look, there was absolutely no early warning system. It didn't work. None of these people were told to get out of their homes in time for the flood water in time for them to save themselves from the flood water. That never happened. What happened to the early response system? So there needs to be an early response system as soon as possibly can. What I was very disappointed with was that in the mainstream media, some of the climate change experts who were recommending changes to climate so that these things would not happen were banned from television. I think this is a very immature approach. The government at this moment, and they should have done it much, they should have done this a year ago. They should have brought in the best climate experts, and they should have had a body, and rather than banning them and silencing them, they should have listened to them and then created a policy. Look, I'm a journalist. It's not for me to give out a policy to the government of Pakistan. But I can tell you this, that the government of Pakistan needs to speak to people who are expert in this area rather than banning them. So it's very disappointing to see them banning those people from mainstream media, not having local body elections, whether it is an earthquake, whether it's floods, whether it's terrorism. You need to have local body elections. We are too large a country not to have local body elections and a local body in place. And lastly, I think they need to speak to their people. They need to talk to their people. They need to tell them what's going to happen. One of the things in this tragedy is the uncertainty kills you. People have no clue when they will be going home. People have no clue when the water will recede, whether there's another flash flood coming or not. They're just hearing things. It's rumors because the government is not talking to them. What happened to radio? Why did they not reach out to people through radio, through television, through other means? So rather than constantly demeaning mainstream media or clamping down on social media, this was the time to use the media in order to speak to their own people and find solutions. So I think the government needs to really become more mature about their approach to natural disasters than just firefighting and saying, okay, don't make people out to be beggars. There's a dignity to people also. So you have to treat them like that rather than just say empty words. And there needs to be a control system, a somewhat comprehensive, strategy rather than just running to one camp and running to another camp.
How does climate governance in Pakistan, from local councils to provincial and federal level, fail to reflect the specific vulnerabilities of women and children? If there are some specific vulnerabilities that you think should be given more importance?
Well, for one, I think nobody's really talking about population control. I followed the flood all the way from Islamabad to Jalalpur, Peerwala, Alipur. So yes, in certain localities where the population was thick, tabahi zyada thi, there was far more destruction. But in in areas where the population was, thin, there wasn't. Most of these people are living on riverbeds. Come on, I mean, in Punjab and Lahore, you have RUDA, Ravi Urban Development Authority. You are actually building on the banks of the Ravi. And, the climate change experts have protested against it. People living on the close to the riverbed have protested against this. That you cannot actually build on the banks of a river, but that's going ahead. So where is the strategy? On the one hand, you are talking about not building on riverbeds, and on the other hand, you're letting this huge housing complex go forward, this luxury housing complex. And what was the need of the housing complex? Were there people protesting and saying, we want this housing complex on the Ravi? I mean, when you make a plan or a policy, you say that this is the need for it. So where was the need for it? So I think population control is something that has to be talked about. Contraception is something that has to be talked about, which is not talked about, simply because you will anger the right-wing mullah in this country. But women and children really, really suffer when families are large, when women are having too many children, when women are dying in childbirth, or when they just don't have enough money to feed all their children, and they have to make a choice. Do we put them in school or do we feed all of them? So I think these are the basics that we need to look at. Population control, not building on the, these are logical kind of solutions. But first and foremost, if you're the government of Pakistan, for God's sakes, listen to your climate experts instead of banning them.
Even amid loss, there are sparks of resilience. Communities often step in where the state lags.
Absolutely. I think there should be a holistic approach when it comes to climate change. I think we're still operating in silos in different departments, silos in different provinces as well. Until and unless we don't come up with an integrated approach, we cannot fight climate change properly. Were there any local community-led initiatives you observed that could be models for policymakers?
Well, I mean, I think that the United Nations, for example, is a good way, the way they come out and give relief to people. I've been watching them since the Afghan war, and I think that they have a very good way of reaching, not just rescuing people, but also the camps that they set up are model camps, and the government can learn from them. But I have to say one thing, that the people of Multan, the businessmen of Multan, I saw them myself traveling in their own cars, and they had made these dry ration packets that they were giving out. I think one of the things that's very important, and it's important that you're having that podcast, and people who are watching this podcast, they should know that if you are sending out stuff, please send clothes, please send shoes, please send clean drinking water, waterproof tents. But also, I think you need to send out, dry ration. Don't send out these salons and all of this, because it's going to get spoiled. It's so hot. The sun is so, strong over there. It's better to send dry ration, because then people can make their own food. I think that's important. Cash grants. What about the BISP, Benazir Income Support Program? I remember in the 2022 floods, 25,000 per family was given to people, and that really helped them. This is the time that people need money so they can buy whatever they can. I think cash grants would really relieve the pain of the people, because you don't know where they are. Somebody's in a camp, the other one's with their relatives. It will give them something to go on, at least buy basic groceries. I heard an announcement also that the Punjab government is, they said that they won't charge people for the month of August on the electricity bills. Well, there was no electricity to begin with. Wherever I went, there was no electricity. And the electricity had been cut off 2 or 3 days, sometimes even 10 days prior to the floods.
Thank you so much for providing us insights and for telling us the actual situation on ground, especially with what's happening with children and women. Thank you so much for your time, Munizae.
Floods in South Punjab, like those across Pakistan, are not isolated disasters. They are recurring reminders of climate inequality, poor planning, and the human cost of inaction. Yet, as Munizae's reporting shows, there are also stories of survival of women and children fighting to reclaim dignity in the aftermath. This has been Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm Mahin Azam Khan. See you next time.